Well, she's showing it, so she must why that is popping up a lot. Something last night, or what was that situation in 20 years? Lava Loving it. Oh, yeah, that did change everything 20 years ago. Yeah. What was the situation? Good morning, Valerie. I've never seen some of these stunning photos.
Good morning everyone. So grateful and happy to see you all. I realize this is one of the few occasions that I am getting up and I say something whenever I do this at church on Sundays, where I say, why do you say that, Valerie? People know who you are. But this occasion, a lot of folks do not. So, my name is Reverend Dr. Valerie H. Holly. Well, thank you so much. That was not said for that. No, but seriously, I am one of 3 ministers here at Judson Memorial Church. There is the Reverend Michael Lucie, who is sitting here, and the transition minister, Reverend Julie Johnson Staples. On behalf of Judson Memorial Church, which all of you, or most of you, I understand, are members of for a long time, we welcome you here today for the celebration, and we've been informed it's straight up a celebration, for the celebration of the life of Lee Guilliatt. Yes, give that a hand. Oh yeah, we're so grateful for this opportunity. Clearly she has touched all of our lives. And the one thing I'm supposed to say is, you will find these items on your table. And most of them colorful, and I just realized they're colorful on both sides. This is for you to fill out at your leisure, or whatever it is you want to say, and to Essie, because she's going to collect them afterwards, after this party is held today, and she will collect them all, and at her leisure, and whenever she's able, she will read them. So you probably want to write them so that she can read them. I mean, if you write like Valerie, you really need to do that. But seriously, that's what these are for. So again, I welcome you. I thank you. And let's have this party going.
I'm so sorry that work keeps me from being able to be there today to celebrate Lee, but I'm very grateful that Essie has asked me to reminisce a little bit virtually. I first came to Judson through Al Carmine's then boyfriend, Jeffrey Apter, and I remember vividly the first rehearsal I attended for About Time, Al's new show in 1970. We all sat in the long room arranged by vocal categories and screamed Al's music using sheets of paper with lyrics. There was no notated score, we just learned the music by rote. I was very loud, I sang pretty high, and was a limited musician, so this was a perfect match for my skills. The first person I met that night was Essie, whose radiant smile made me feel entirely welcome in this strange new place. Al asked me what my highest note was, and I said high A, so Al wrote me a solo with 8 high A's. I was part of an ensemble with Lee and Essie, Jerry Fargo, Craig Keel, David Pursley, and Maggie Wise. We were all playing famous people in history. I was Pablo Picasso, and if you could believe that Picasso was a Jewish hippie from Brooklyn, it was all quite credible. And that was how I first met Lee. Lee had this very long, amazing solo in that show called A Child's Garden of Seasons. During the show, we all had to sit on stage, which meant the Judson floor, and do a chore when we weren't singing. I sketched endless pictures of Lee from behind and of Margaret Wright, captivated by how beautiful they both were, each in her own way. And I loved listening to Lee belt out that song cycle with her powerful pipes and her boundless exuberance. Well, the following winter came the first revival of Christmas wrappings, and Lee hated her song in that show. When they saw the star, she lobbied successfully to have Al write her a new song, No Room in the Inn. And I inherited the dreaded When They Saw the Star, which actually I adored getting to perform. But No Room in the Inn was not your typical Lee number. It was meant to be soft and floaty, and she was determined to sing it that way. More about that in a minute. I was feeling a bit depressed when I first came to Judson, and Lee drew me out of that with unquestioning friendship and enormous generosity. She taught me to drink gin with a little help from Al, and she had me sit for various portraits. I painted Lee, and she painted me and made a woodblock print of one of them. The carved block became the door to a kitchen cabinet in Lee and Essie's loft. And speaking of kitchen cabinets, one day when Lee was over and saw all my opera LPs stacked up on the floor, she came back, carved away part of the built-in cabinets in my kitchen, moved the fridge into that alcove, and built me an enormous kitchen unit housing all my LPs and a bunch of kitchen supplies. It's still there 50 years later. And when I thought about moving into a studio, Lee came with me and consulted about how to best use the small space. Well, she decided it was really too small, so I remained in my apartment. Lee, therefore, became responsible for me having rent control for the next 50 years. Lee sang so many memorable roles in Al's shows: the lesbian witch in The Journey of Snow White, Ma Barker in Wanted, Gertrude Stein in, well, everything. But if I had to choose one Lee role and experience, it would have to be Joan, Lee's great tour de force. I was so lucky to be cast opposite Lee in that show, and every night at Judson, and then off Broadway, to have a beautiful song of love and deep friendship sung directly to me by Lee. Meanwhile, back at Christmas wrappings, Lee came to me with a project. As a fledgling voice teacher, I had to help her find a way to sing softly in head voice for No Room in the Inn. So Lee came over and we began to work. Fortunately for me, the word room occurs about 500 times in the song, and the oo vowel is the most congenial for inducing head voice. So I vocalized Lee on oo, higher and softer and softer and softer. And suddenly there it was, this gentle, beautiful sound floating out of Lee, the sound we loved to hear in that song that just melted us all into a puddle for years to come. We both jumped around and laughed, and Lee had that big, hearty laugh. I can still hear it now in this room. Well, fast forward to the last Christmas wrappings, almost 50 years later. When I arrived at Judson, now as an audience member, I was told that Lee was sitting in the front row and wanted me to sit in the seat next to her. So I was already close to blubbering, just at the thought of seeing this show that always makes me cry from nostalgia and its musical beauty, and being given such a place of honor. When the time came for Lee's solo, I helped her up, and suddenly, as she tilted her head back and began to sing, she was transformed into the Lee of decades past. No Room in the Inn floated out ethereally. I sat there mesmerized, gazing up at that gorgeous jawline and those cheekbones, listening to the song, welling up with tears. After it ended, I gave Lee a hand as she sat back down, about to tell her how beautiful it sounded, and how beautiful she looked, with her head tilted back, transported. But before I could say anything, Lee turned to me and whispered, "My damn teeth kept slipping down." That was Lee. The ethereal melded with the earthy. I love you, Lee, and I miss you.
Okay, I don't know what I did in another life to deserve to go next after that. Wow. I think I first saw, it was right around my first Christmas wrappings, I think 75, 76, something like that. Good morning, my name's Rick Fitzgerald, and I once lived at 45 Crosby Street. That should tell you something. I want to thank Essie for inviting me to make these few remarks. I promised her I'd keep them under 30 minutes. At Frank O'Hara's memorial service, Larry Rivers began his remarks by saying, "Frank O'Hara was my best friend." There are about 60 other people in New York City who thought Frank O'Hara was their best friend. I know what he meant. Lee Guilliatt was one of my best friends. But everyone here today feels the same way that Lee Guilliatt was their best friend. What a testament to Lee and her life. When I used to try to explain to people who never met Lee what she was all about, I said, going out for a drink in the village with Lee was like going out for a drink in Rome with the Pope. She presided. I first met Lee shortly after I moved into 45 Crosby Street. Seems that she and Essie were having trouble hanging a door on one of their newly constructed bedrooms, and they asked me if I could help. Well, I agreed, and I took the elevator down to their loft for the very first time. Upon watching Lee trying to drive the screws through the hinge and into the door frame, two things were immediately obvious to me. One, this was a larger-than-life person, somebody I probably didn't want to offend. Two, the drill she was using was on reverse. Oh dear. Little did I know that this was the person who had built sets for the Living Theater and Merce Cunningham and God knows how many other times here at Judson Poets Theater. But all I knew in that moment was the drill she was using was on reverse, and that she was never going to hang that door without changing the direction of the drill. So I very carefully pointed out to her that the drill was indeed on reverse. Oh, the eruption of anger and frustration moving into that wonderfully boisterous laughter. And it sealed our friendship forever. Shortly after she passed, I wrote a poem, a kind of prose poem, about that moment and a few other things, and I'd like to share that today. Letter to Lee. Just one more glass of Bombay gin, that's all I ask. Or one more walk to the wine store in Little Italy, and one more glass of some obscure Bordeaux. Oh, Lee, let's meet Richard again in Paris. He's waiting for us at Chez René, standing outside, tapping his foot, eager to watch us have our boeuf bourguignon. Let's buy the building again. Let's evict the crooked landlord and dream of selling his Rolls Royce to the Italian guys down the street. Let's go to court and get the city on our side. You had my back when my life was spinning, helpless. You had my back when Linda went flying off the globe. And you had my back when you welcomed Marilyn with open and generous arms. And I had yours when I gently explained the reason the drill wasn't working. When I gently explained the reason the drill wasn't working was because you had it on reverse. Oh, how your anger and frustration and your laughter exploded together and turned a casual acquaintance into a 50-year friendship. So let's have another glass of Côte de Rhône, another open studio with George and David and Ronald and Al. Whatever you made was beautiful. Everything you planted grew and grew. Your optimism and hope made everything everlasting. Love you, Lee.
My door, the leaves have fallen. A cold, wild wind will come. Sweethearts go by together, but I still miss someone. No, I never got over those blue eyes. I see them everywhere. I miss those arms that held me when all the love was there. I wonder if she's sorry for leaving what we begun. There's someone for me somewhere, but I still miss someone. No, I never got over those blue eyes.
Hello, I'm John Borden, Essie's brother, and I want to share a few moments with you about some of my own experiences with Lee. I've known Lee for between 45 and 50 years now, and the first time that I heard about Lee was shortly after Essie moved to the New York City, and Essie had managed to find an apartment. She'd managed to find a job, and she'd managed to find Judson Church. She also had a number of friends, many of whom she has here today, both from the neighborhood and from Judson. And one day, shortly after moving to New York, I received a letter from Essie in the mail and Lee, and it was unusual to get a letter, but not as unusual as would it be today with cell phones. But I opened the letter not thinking much about it. But in it, Essie described with Lee about their newfound loving relationship. And it was very nice to hear, something that I'd thought about as a possibility. And I called Essie up, and as I say, we didn't make phone calls too often back then, but I called Essie, and she was very relieved and not terribly surprised. And shortly thereafter, my brother gave a call, and he lent his support as well. And I'm pleased to see that Kat, my niece, my deceased brother's daughter, is here today as well to share this experience. Anyway, shortly thereafter, my dad made a phone call with my mom. And Essie, I think, was a bit apprehensive to know what his response would be. But he assured her that after hemming and hawing a little bit, it wasn't really so much like losing a daughter in the relationship. It was gaining a daughter. And indeed, I gained a sister. Lee and I remained very close for the rest of our lives, and for that I'm grateful. I want to share just a little bit of a story. After spending many vacations and walks down Crosby Street and learning about cast iron buildings and taking a peek at the 1927 Rolls Royce on the first floor of Crosby Street and learning all kinds of tidbits about the neighborhood. I want to mention something about Lee's youthful period of time, and that was that similar to Tom Fogarty's beautiful story that's captured in the books that's on your tables, and I urge you to take a peek at them because it's a good portrayal of a Lee you probably haven't experienced but may have heard tidbits of. I also heard a wonderful story about Lee. As a young girl, she had heard that in Nebraska City growing up, that the ice along the river would make an almost exploding sound as it would thaw. And so she would rush down after school every day for a whole year because she wanted to hear that sound. She'd never heard anything like that. Well, if I understand correctly, and Essie's good at correcting me when I make mistakes, so she can correct this as I'm making mistakes. The whole year went by and she never heard it explode, and she went one day and it was all broken up. So the next year she did it again. She finally got to hear the river crack all the way along, and she ran home a very, very happy young girl. I think I'll not go on with many stories, but I would love to share some of these stories with you as we gather after this. And I want to just point out that Essie and Lee have given me an example of love and friendship unlike other people that I'm aware of. I feel so grateful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. And hi, everybody. My name is Micah, and if you are wondering why I'm wearing a short-sleeve shirt in the middle of winter, it is because in the recent past, I have become the honored recipient of a treasure trove of Lee Guilliatt's short-sleeve plaid shirts. So when I heard this was going to be a party, I was like, I'm going to wear the party. So thank you, Lee. Thank you, Essie. I love a plaid shirt, and I especially love a plaid shirt that has been worn by our Lee Guilliatt. So we're going to, of course, continue to hear Lee's beautiful singing throughout the remainder of this service, but we now also have an opportunity to sing ourselves. So I invite you to rise in body and or spirit, and we're going to join together in singing in Al Carmine's classic, Faith is Such a Simple Thing, and Al wrote this song for Lee to sing as the title character in Joan, which, if you don't know, is a contemporary update of the Joan of Arc story, and in the show, Lee sang it as she was anticipating her imminent execution. I think that she would want us to sing it with joy, so sing out, Louise.
It is so good to be here for this wonderful celebration of Lee's life. So good. And it's certainly a privilege to be asked to speak. When Essie asked me, I couldn't help wondering, why me? Lee, as it has been so beautifully pointed out, had so many friendships. People from the art world, the theater world, from decades of living in New York, and not least from being grounded in this community here at Judson. This service speaks volumes about how far Lee's circle extended. So I'm here, one of you, one of Lee's many Judson friends. When I first came to Judson in 1969, my encounters with Lee were terrifying. She was not at all what this timid girl from white-bread suburbia expected of a fellow churchgoer. And I had no way as to how to take Lee's fierce passions and strong opinions, but I eventually learned. And our bonds of friendship took a big leap forward beginning in 1972. That was the year that Lee and Essie found each other in love. It was also the year that Rethel and I were married here at Judson. So over the past 50 years, we have enjoyed sharing a common anniversary. Of course, Lee and Essie were legally married much later, but it was a formality. In both cases, 1972 was the start of something big for both of us. But even before that, before Rethel and I even knew each other, and before Lee and Essie became a couple, Rethel and Lee were friends through their encounters here at Judson. There's a story from that time that I want to share with you to add to the many others about Lee's love for her friends. In the mid-1960s, Rethel arrived at Judson to serve his alternative service. He was a conscientious objector to the Vietnam War. And Rethel let Al Carmines, one of the ministers there at the time, know that he was interested in theater. Al set him to work building sets for the Judson Poets Theater. Now, that wasn't exactly what Rethel had in mind, but there he met Lee Guilliatt, who was also building sets. At one point, they both did appear in a play at the Poets Theater, and that was Bob Nichols' play, The Expressway. But Rethel and Lee became friends, and one night in August, Rethel was invited, somewhat casually, to join Dave Johnson, another Judson member, and some friends of Dave's that were out-of-towners for the evening. It was Rethel's birthday. The out-of-towners were staying at a spacious apartment that might, in Rethel's mind, be big enough for a nice surprise birthday party. And he knew this couple were fairly intense and could be a little emotionally unpredictable, but he thought the get-together had promise nonetheless. And just about the time that he was to head out for the evening, his friend Craig Keel called him just to say, since it was Rethel's birthday, he wanted to be sure he had something to do that evening. Well, Rethel was sure that this was the tip-off. And knowingly, he said to Craig that indeed he did have plans for the evening, and Rethel's surprise party fantasy had become a full-fledged certainty in his mind. So it came as an even bigger surprise when Dave called moments later to say that the out-of-towners were into something pretty heavy, and it would be best if he didn't drop by after all. So what's the birthday boy to do? Rethel called Lee. At that time, she lived only a short distance away at Westbeth, and Lee took pity on Rethel and immediately invited him over to her place for the evening. So Rethel celebrated with friends after all, and since Lee had inherited a whole lot of sports equipment from her father, she gave Rethel a lot of very nice fishing equipment as a birthday gift. A good surprise, after all. Lee's artistry extended to the canvas of her friendships and community here at Judson. And even when she could no longer create her beautiful paintings, Lee delighted in visits from friends and from time spent here at Judson. I'm sure many of you can attest to that. But more than any of these, however, she gloried in the steadfast care and deep devotion of her beloved wife, Essie. Spinning tales, sharing memories, and loving life, Lee lived large, loved well, and never stopped creating. We'll miss her.
If you were a kid at Judson in the 1980s or the 1990s, you might have believed that every home in America came outfitted with paintings by Lee Guilliatt. I was rather shocked to learn that my New Jersey schoolmates didn't have Guilliatts. Where was the milkweed, the cherries, the riotous chromatic glory of spring flowers and fall leaves? I was too young to remember when I first fell in love with Lee. Recently, she liked to tell my children about how I would just pop up at coffee hour attached to her like a barnacle, which sounds about right to me. In my own early memories of Lee, we are hanging out together in the back of the meeting room, talking about baseball in a huge cloud of smoke, flanked by Arlene Carmen and Harry Katukas. No 9-year-old could hope for better company. I imagine part of what drew me to Lee was that she didn't treat me like a child. She always made me feel truly seen as a person, and my take on the latest antics of my New York Mets worthy of consideration and rebuttal. But I suspect what really drew me to Lee was her charisma, her passion, her voice. Lee was expressive. Lee sparked and crackled. Lee was loud. Lee spoke her mind. Lee emoted fearlessly. You knew what Lee felt, especially if she felt it about you. Lee laughed so distinctly that when she and Essie came to see me perform in high school plays, I could pinpoint Lee's spot in the darkened audience by the sound of her laughter. When I close my eyes, I see the glorious colors of 100 Guilliatts, and I hear Lee's laugh. And that, as Lee might say, is beautiful and satisfying to behold. From Thinking About an Artist's Passion, July 26, 1998. I never had any other ambition than to be an artist. I was making drawings as soon as I could grasp a crayon in my hand. I was the kid in grade school and high school who made all the posters and painted the sets for the plays and designed the decorations for the spring proms and made the biology drawings for all my friends, as well as myself. I was very clever, and it took me years to overcome the superficiality that cleverness encouraged in me. Superficiality is probably the greatest danger to the soul of a young artist, because real expression does not come easily or immediately. My first brush with a really demanding teacher who would not tolerate glibness came when I met my drawing teacher at the University of Nebraska in my freshman year. He had given his class a specific problem: to draw rocks. I got bored with the problem, since I had a great natural ability to draw, so I finished the first part of the assignment in about 5 minutes, and then I was amusing my fellow students with thumbnail sketches of their faces, quite graceful and accurate drawings, but very superficial studies. Cute little cartoons. He came upon me showing off my facility and read me the riot act. I know that you can draw, young lady, but I'm going to teach you how to see. It is not enough to be facile. You must discipline your eye and your hand to go beyond the obvious, to sense the spirit of whatever it is you are drawing. I was quite chagrined, being accustomed to being praised for my facility, and I determined to try and understand what he was talking about. It was not easy. He was very hard on me. You know the old adage, to whom much is given, much is required. He had a passion for art. He demanded not only facility, but commitment to the work of expression. He did not want me to be satisfied with cleverness. He demanded a sincerity and a humility that I only dimly understood. It is a lesson I have never forgotten. Art requires a passionate desire to illuminate, to isolate forms and ideas and feelings so that a new focus, a fresh vision, an emotional image stripped of accumulated misunderstanding may be experienced by the artist and the audience or viewer. In my own work, I struggle to present visual images that are free of connotations, to get at the essence of things. I believe that any subject, no matter how mundane, is and of itself beautiful and satisfying to behold. I paint milkweed pods blowing in the wind. I paint piles of cherries or plums or peaches. I paint pond scum on a marsh in Wisconsin, or glorious sunsets in raging colors of red and orange in a threatening sky, or thousands of flowers in a garden. I don't have an agenda, a message, if you will, other than to encourage people to regain the ability to see. Fundamentally, the challenge of my art is to encourage people to dare to look at their environment with innocent, untutored vision, to see for themselves and trust the vision they have and enjoy their own intimate perceptions of the world. When I was very young, an art student at the Art Institute of Chicago, I wrote a poem which still goes a long way toward expressing what I feel about being an artist. I weep with the pain of rejection. Harsh is the age unsoothed by poetry, uninnocent and yet not wise. Those ones I could love grope through steel dark forms toward a shattered dawn, not once but 1,000 times, not knowing me, dispossessed poet, or caring that I could repair the broken glass of morning. The work I do year after year is my attempt to encourage others to look clear-eyed and joyfully at the world we share. I'm not naive enough to suggest that everything in our world is beautiful. What I do suggest, however, is that art and artists offer an alternative experience, a communication from one human being to another, which is stimulating, maybe even irritating, but often enlightening. Repairing the broken glass of morning does not mitigate the often horrifying events we must confront, but it enables us to see more clearly both the troubles and the wonder of life. Through art, we can learn to see each other as well. And in that miracle of unspoken recognition, perhaps we can begin to trust and tolerate both our differences and our similarities in a new way, accepting ourselves and our common humanity, celebrating the mystery of love and suffering together.
stood hard as iron, water like a stone. Snow had fallen, snow on snow, snow on snow. In the bleak midwinter, long ago, a God held hand and hold him, nor sustain. Heaven and earth shall flee away when he comes to reign. In the bleak midwinter, a stable place sufficed. The Lord God incarnate, Jesus Christ. Angels and archangels may have gathered there. Cherubim and seraphim thronged the air, but his mother only in her maiden bliss worship the beloved with a kiss.
It's such an honor to be with all of you and to hear all of these stories. Thank you so much. So I came into Lee's life a bit later than many of the speakers who have spoken thus far. But from the fall of 2009 to the fall of 2021, I was the honored recipient of dozens of voicemail messages from Lee Guilliatt. These messages were typically several minutes long, sometimes cut off by the voicemail machine in the ether, but they were always filled with joy and poetry and love, and they were often asking questions that required deep thought or making suggestions that required immediate action. I would try to call Lee back within a day, but somehow I always seemed to miss her first call. Perhaps the universe thought that I needed the chance to be able to rewind and replay and listen to her words again before attempting a usually inadequate response. I did not want to call Lee back unprepared. I saved many of these voicemail messages for months, and I would listen to them periodically, often while readying myself for the day, brushing my teeth, painting my nails, coiffing my hair that she so lovingly teased all the time. But there are three distinct messages that rose to the top of the collection, which I saved, both out of habit and because among an ocean of messages that lasted well over 2 minutes, these three messages were brazen in their brevity. As someone who's been hired to serve as a faith leader here at Judson, I want to be abundantly clear that Lee Guilliatt is one of my favorite faith leaders. She wasn't ordained, of course, and if she were here in body right now, I would probably receive a lengthy voicemail message later today telling me exactly why she would never want to be called a faith leader. But I'm going to risk it today. Lee Guilliatt is one of my favorite faith leaders because she taught me to tell better stories, and she taught me to pay better attention to the stories of others, full stop. You can hear it in the loving way that our speakers this morning have built Lee's living eulogy through collective storytelling. No one holds the one sacred story key to Lee's life. Every single person here is a testament to the countless fabulous facets that she embodied. So, to offer just a little minuscule facet of my own, I want to go back to those 3 voicemail messages that Lee left for me because they stopped me, and they shook me, and they changed me with their brevity and their boldness. These 3 voicemail messages are my holy trinity of Lee Guilliatt gospel, and reading them for you now occurs to me to be the only almost adequate way to truly eulogize her. So message 1 from the spring of 2014. Hi, Micah. I fear that you overuse the word awesome. So you might want to think about that. And what you actually mean. Click. And message 2 from the fall of 2018. Hi, Micah. I would like to set a time for just us to get together so that we can talk about death and what might come after life. I have ideas. Click. And message 3 from the spring of 2019. Wow! Click. The Gospel according to Lee Guilliatt. And here's my inadequate exegesis of this holy trinity of Guilliatt morsels. 1, don't overuse the word awesome. Not everything is worthy of your awe, so be careful and caring with your attention. 2, share your ideas about life and death and all the beauty in between. We're all scared, we're all messy, and we're all creative. So don't hide your fear, don't keep yourself hidden, and make things. Make time to throw your ideas at the wall and be a sticky wall to catch the ideas of those you admire and love. And finally, 3, be willing to say wow. While being careful with your awe and attention, be ready and willing to accept the surprises that pop open and remind you that you don't have it all figured out, and say wow. Humble yourself and say wow when you really mean it. And at the risk of offending Lee's spirit with my characteristic hyperbole, I will say from the bottom of my hyperbolic heart, Lee Guilliatt was and is awesome. She is worthy of awe and adoration and wows. She poured vibrant, abundant life into her own art. She sang her own song, her own songs, loudly, proudly, and we'll all hear in a few minutes when we hear her sing and when we get to sing along with her communion song. Lee was also deeply interested in all of us singing our own song. If you don't know that communion song, pay specific attention to what she says in the lyric, sing your own song. Not the one the wonder-starved world tells you to sing, but the unique song that lives inside each of us, aching to be belted in the only way that you can belt it. I am obsessed with that line, and Josh read it when he was sharing her sermon. I'm obsessed with that line in one of Lee's poems in which she says that art can repair the broken glass of mourning. And in the poem, she's using the word mourning spelled M-O-R-N-I-N-G. But I think it can also address the word mourning spelled M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G. Lee explicitly designed this service to be a celebration, to be a party, a sharing of story and song that could repair the broken glass of mourning. So here you have it. That's my story shard that I have to share with all of you. So you heard Reverend Valerie say it at the start of the service. On these multicolored pieces of paper, share your story shard. Together we are repairing the broken glass of mourning together. When you share that story, when you tell the stories and you are talking over lunch and you give those pieces of paper back to Essie as you're leaving, you are putting back together that mosaic that is the magnificent Lee Guilliatt. That's awesome. Wow.
Wow.
Hi, my name's Helena Fitzgerald. I can't believe I have to follow Micah or really any of the people we've heard from today, of course, Lee most of all. I am going to read something I wrote in October of 2021, a few days before Lee passed. I've known Lee, this will be in the thing I'm going to read. I've known Lee basically my whole life. Rick Fitzgerald, my father, spoke earlier in this service. So I wrote this the week before she died, when she was in hospice at home in her and Essie's loft. My husband and I and Micah and his husband went over and spent the day with her. And I wrote this the next morning. It's called Old Friends and the Parties They Throw. There is nothing to do about grief, so we make a lasagna and take it over to the old building. There is nothing to do about bad news, so we text some people, and then 8 people in a room together as a party. We tell stories. There is nothing to do about anything. It's Sunday. We are all trying to shut out the day and trying to make it last forever. Death is very stupid, but there is food, and there is a party, and there are all the old stories. Here is the most important story as I know it. My dad is young, in his 20s, and has moved into a building downtown. He meets his neighbor in the stairwell. His neighbor is trying to fix something with a drill, but has the drill set backward. He gently attempts to correct her, and she yells at him, and then they are best friends for the next 50 years. Lee is already a downtown legend. My dad is young and lost and nobody. His life grows out of knowing Lee and her wife Essie, whose love story is also already a small legend below 14th Street. I don't remember when I first heard this story. I only remember knowing it. I have no memories in which I do not know this story. The whole of my life that I know about, that I can inhabit in memory, is one in which I already know this story. Neither do I remember the first time I went over to Lee and Essie's loft, the one in the same building where my dad lived when he was young and lost and first met them, the one where they still live now. I was there, I assume, again and again as a small child, since we lived only a few blocks away before we moved. But I don't really know. I was too young to form memories, and I am making up this whole thing. based on assumptions and wishes and old photographs. Maybe we saw them a lot, maybe we didn't, in the way that in New York, you often only see your close friends who live an easy 20-minute walk away once or twice a year, despite your best intentions. I have chosen one made-up version of a story from before I was old enough to retain stories, and I carry it around with me, taping it up, papering it over the walls. I make that same brief walk all the time now, from the church to Crosby Street and back again. I can tell you what happens now and has happened the days last summer when Thomas and I walked 2 hours downtown to sit on a roof for 45 minutes and then walk 2 hours back uptown. I know that there were parties in the winter at the end of 2019, that small groups of people gathered around a table when it was cold outside, and again in the spring of this year when we were all ecstatic to be in a room together again. I know that that room looked exactly the same as it had when I was a small child, and that the lamp above the table was the same one it was 20 and 30 years ago. The room promised that memory was real, that stories could be relied upon, and that anything anyone says happened, happened. It was a place for telling stories. I sat and listened. I wove myself backward into the things that had happened before I was part of them. But I cannot tell you where these memories start, when the first one occurred, or how far back they go. The stories and table and the lamp and these people and their faces were familiar to me before I could remember them becoming familiar. They have simply always been there. I remember visiting in late childhood or adolescence, but the memory I have is a composite with little narrative to it. The jokes and feelings loom large in the details of one action and another, what happened and when, how old everyone was, and how long we stayed, slide off like hands on a glass wall. I remember the quality of light and how it was exactly the same as it is now. The long afternoon turning into evening, that no clocks in Vegas drowsiness that certain old-time apartments in New York have, despite the presence of a huge clock over the doorway to the kitchen. We sat around the table and Lee told stories. Lee telling stories was the center and foundation, the still point around which everything revolved. I don't really know when or how often I was actually in this room in childhood, but I know that the same lamp was there, and I know that Lee told stories. They were different every time, although the heart of them persisted, and she took such lavish joy in them, like someone getting into a warm bath on a cold day. Sometimes I become convinced I can place my first clear memory of sitting around that kitchen table and listening to Lee. It was the late 90s. She would have been in her 60s then. I remember her large and majestic, drinking wine and telling her old jokes with my dad, huge in a denim shirt and jeans and a big silver belt, her hair still dark, her body still capacious, taking up half the room. I was scared of her, partly because I was so young, but partly because everyone was scared of Lee. I don't think there was any other possible response to have to her. I had never met anyone like her. But then again, I think neither had anyone else her whole life, from end to end. I think it was maybe the same time of year. I think I was not quite yet a teenager. I think my parents were visiting the city and letting me tag along to see their old friends. I think Lee was happy to see us. I think it was after dinner. I think we'd stayed late, sitting around the table listening to her. I think she hadn't gotten sick at all yet. I think she told stories about downtown theater in the 1970s, and art shows at the Loft, and how she got herself here out of the Midwest, and the artists she came up with and befriended, and the shows at Judson, and the music Elle wrote, and who was a bitch and who wasn't, and the arguments she had with people, and how she was right, and how she met Essie, and how they fell in love, and how it made them, in a small and yet not so small way, famous for a while. I think I listened and was nervous and reverent and didn't say anything stupid. I think maybe for a minute I understood how important it all was before I went downstairs and back outside and wrapped myself up in the native self-centeredness of being almost a teenager, of being so eager for the world as to insist on ignoring it entirely. I think she and my dad made fun of each other and drank wine like they used to and talked about the old days. I think everyone got drunk, and I think I didn't understand why everyone was in a better and better mood as the evening went on, but I think I was happy about it. I think that was when I knew that these people mattered to me, that I wanted them to be in my life, and that I wanted to be in theirs if I could ever be cool enough for it. But maybe none of this happened, or maybe none of it happened like this. So much of this is guesses, so much of it is fictionalized and constructed. I have been inventing these people and their history so long that now I cannot pry apart the facts I do know and the ones I have made up, filled in, or assumed. I have heard so many stories and told so many myself secondhand that they crowd out the memories. The two twine up together, a text at once invented and true. During those nights or after them, my mom would gently make fun of my dad and his stories, how much of them was made up or exaggerated. She was definitely right about that, but maybe that was the point. Love was creating a mythology and building it bigger over the years until it was large and bright enough to survive beyond the people in it, to carry them forward past themselves. Here is the oldest, most hackneyed, most cliché story. The one from movies and books and from years around the kitchen table under the same antique lamp, bathed in the same stopped clock glow. Sometimes your friends, through time and repetition, become your family. Sometimes this sort of friendship can, in the manner of family, be handed down generationally, persisting from one era to another, passing between hands and faces and decades. Sometimes people take root in one another's hearts and grow there as trees. Nothing that grows is permanent, but sometimes a person inhabits the world in a way that makes this seem like it could not possibly be true. Surely some people must earn the right to live forever. Sometimes it's a Sunday and there's bad news and nothing to do, and you bring over food and tell stories. Sometimes family and friends are the same, and sometimes grief is a party. People at Judson say, holding you in our hearts. I don't entirely know what the phrase means, although it's self-explanatory enough, but I like the weight of it, like a smooth stone in a palm. I tell Essie we're holding them in our hearts. We gather around a bedside. We bring over useless gifts. We sit on couches and tell stories. We hold Lee in our hearts. Maybe it is presumptuous to even include myself in that we. I rewrite the story, I paper over the details. I try to sort out what is love in the here and now and what is borrowing old stories. When my dad would tell his stories about then, about being young and cool and living in the loft at 45 Crosby, about being lost and ecstatic in the way one can only be in a certain version of being young, I cared too much and understood too little. I didn't recognize it yet because I hadn't been there. I thought what he was describing was what all of adulthood held, and that it would last forever once I arrived. I thought everyone I loved would always be around. I thought the chances were infinite. I thought there would always be more time. I was late when I finally got out past the story and through them to loving the people who actually stood in front of me, but I thought it didn't matter. I thought I could start whenever I arrived. I thought what I had missed would not make a difference and that there would always be time to catch up. I remember how my dad's stories about the days he first knew Lee and Essie when all of them were young, the friendships, the building, the ease and wildness, the downtown city and what was possible there, seemed to describe something he had stepped away from and could go back to at any time, at which point he would find it waiting for him unchanged. It was only when I got older that I realized that this is the way people tell stories about the things that are profoundly lost, that which time has rolled over heavy as it repaves the roads, the things to which there is no way back. So many of the stories were about parties. My dad would tell me that people used to climb up the fire escape to get into the parties in the loft building. In recent months, Lee often didn't know what year it was or who we were, but she always knew that she was throwing a great party. Now we stand in a room where the room is her stories. The room is the day and the day is a party. We eat cookies and we talk to the cat who wanders around trying to attack people's shoelaces. We walk over to the bed and get quiet, and then we go back over to the couches and whisper about something and try to make each other laugh. The point of a party is to try to freeze time in its tracks so that it is only this room and there is no forward motion, just the stasis of getting up to get drinks and sitting down again and telling jokes and holding each other's hands and offering each other food over and over. We all tell Lee she threw such a good party. We all decide she can hear us and that she knows. Of course I did, I imagine she says, annoyed at being told. We are all telling stories, but that's what we've always been doing, picking up where she left off. keeping the party going.
Thank you so much, Helena. And Helena has definitely laid the foundation for the party that is about to come. But if you need another reminder that we are at a party, we're about to hear it in Lee's own words as we prepare to sing her communion song. So a couple of housekeeping things as we prepare to sing together and party together. You now have bottles on your tables. One is alcoholic, one is not. I've been told that the non-alcoholic bottle still appears to probably have alcohol in it, but I think it says Odd Bird on it and a Chardonnay. So if you would prefer to not drink alcohol, the party can still continue for you. Just make sure that you are pouring that into your glass. And you have Lee's communion song in your bulletin. So I invite you to turn there now. And as we prepare to sing and as we pour cups for one another, hear these words. This invitation from Lee's last will and testament from August 13th, 2019. It is my further wish that my executor, as an expense in administering my estate, provide for a celebration party as soon after my death as is practical. All of my friends attending this party shall be provided with as much to eat and drink as they desire. All types of wonderful food are to be served, and no expense is to be spared. No sad songs are to be sung. So with that in mind, and in Lee's spirit, I invite you to rise joyously in body and or spirit, and let's sing Lee's communion song with aplomb and fabulosity. All right, everybody, that abundant food is in the back, but now if you would raise your glass, I would like to start here by lifting up Lee's partner of 49 years, the awesome Essie Borden, who absolutely created the party that was demanded by Lee. So thank you, Essie. Round of applause for Essie. And now I would like to benedict us with Lee's own words. Repairing the broken glass of mourning does not mitigate the often horrifying events we must confront, but it enables us to see more clearly both the troubles and the wonder of life. Through art, we can learn to see each other as well. And in that miracle of unspoken recognition, perhaps we can begin to trust and tolerate both our differences and our similarities in a new way, accepting ourselves and our common humanity, celebrating the mystery of love and suffering together. And to that Lee Guilliatt, I can only say, wow. Make an art of your life. Amen. All right. It's time to party and eat. Keep those stories going. Thank you, everyone. Folks, if you're wondering if you can just go back and grab some food, the answer is yes. Just be kind and polite and grab that food. I think there are 3 different choices back there.